All episodes of Let the Music Play podcast can be found in both iTunes and at AshtonGustafson.com. If you have enjoyed these conversations and they have brought joy, peace, and resilience to your life, we ask that you would go to iTunes and leave a review. Our hope is to share these voices and conversations with as many people as we can. And by leaving a review, you will be helping this light make its way into the world. Hey everybody, Ashton, Gustafson, welcome back to another episode of Let the Music Play. Hope you and yours are doing well. I didn't have an interview this week with somebody, and I've been making some notes in this notepad that I carry around, and I said, how about the listeners gets to hear what's going on in the notepad? And so that's what we're going to do today, is chat through the notes in the notepad. So a lot of you guys, you've heard probably somehow, some way in almost every episode, me and the guests that we have on here talk about this phrase, the true self and the false self, the idea of this true self and the false self. I came across this teaching probably about 2 to 3 years ago, and it was like everything shifted. It was a song that I'd known to be true in my bones for a long time, but it was like that song was in another room, and I had my ear up to the wall trying to hear this song, and then finally I got language for it. And once I got language to that song, whoa, just a crazy, beautiful thing started to happen. So I wanted to just break this down for you guys because I know that this isn't going anywhere. Matter of fact, if we can get this, I think that so much beauty is available. And so what I wanted to do is just kind of walk through this idea of the true self and the false self and this language so that when we talk about it on the podcast, people aren't like, what are they talking about? Because I'm so passionate about this. I'm so passionate about this being able to light up your life, to be a gift, to allow you to see, to allow you to operate within your career and your business and your family and your relationships. This is it. This is the juice, man. Like, this is it. So, true self, false self. Where do we begin? So first, let me just begin with this. My first note is this. Language and words, they create worlds for us. Someone said that once before. Like, words create new worlds. I think someone said that. And before we get going into this, just know that something beautiful happens when we actually find language and metaphor for things. All of a sudden, we can be like, oh my gosh, yes. Because we didn't have language for something, it eventually gives us eyes. So the reason why I'm so passionate about this idea of true self and false self is because for me, it gives me beautiful language to navigate my days, navigate my relationships, navigate how I raise my kids, navigate how I run businesses, navigate how I want to lead conversations here at the podcast. So if we don't have language for something, then chances are we may not be able to see what is actually happening. And, one of the big hearts I have for our conversation here is that we can penetrate illusion and touch reality. Penetrate illusion and touch reality. That's really what contemplation is at its core. I remember when Parker J. Palmer taught us that here on the podcast, that contemplation is penetrating illusion and touching reality. So this true self, false self, this is language. This podcast today is going to be new language for you. My hope is that language then leads to eyes. Because if you can have eyes, you can then see. And if you can then see, then you can participate. And if you can then participate, you can then enjoy. Oh, let's go. I mean, we can just pause it right there and move on to next episode. Language. It begins with language. It goes to eyes. That allows us to see, which allows us to actively and appropriately participate, which that allows us to enjoy. And if we are enjoying our lives, our relationships, and our careers, guess what we won't have? Regret. So language. Once we get words, once we get metaphors, we can then see, we can then participate, we can then enjoy, and then we don't have regret. Whether it's a day, a week, a month, a career, or a life, there will come a time when we look backwards, and you are going to want to say, I'm glad I did, in lieu of I wish I had. And so just right out of the gate, I want you guys to know my heart of this true self, false self conversation is just a heart that wants us to awaken to this beautiful, brilliant reality that affects all 7.3, 7.5 billion of us, however many of us are on the planet today. All right, copy that. So, true self, false self. So, how do we begin with this? First off, I want to say that one of my bedrock beliefs is just that the flow and the engine of the universe is love. Now, for some of y'all, that may trip you up a little bit. You may say, "No, that's actually God. No, that's source. No, that's energy." No. Once again, we're all arguing over a few words here. Let me just say, life, love, light, energy, God, source. For me, those are all synonyms. For me, those are all really what I believe is another way to talk about the engine of this whole thing, the engine of life itself. And so as I understand some of the tradition that I come from, there is this flow called love. And love, is love not a very, very interestingly beautiful and mysterious thing? This guy once said that love is patient, and it doesn't boast, and it doesn't keep a record of wrongs, and it always hopes, and it always perseveres. So I believe that's just the flow of life. I believe that love and life is always happening for us. I don't believe that life is happening to us. I believe that love and life is happening for us. There is a flow to how things work. And you can choose to go against the flow. Matter of fact, a lot of people do that. But you can also just step into the river. And as the song goes, you can move gently down the stream. And as you enter the river, which is already moving, you don't have to move it. Love, God, life, light is already ushering in this beautiful river. The invitation is, will you step in and will you go on this journey? Will you be present? Will you take a look around as you enter the flow and see all of these lovely and beautiful things that you have and you can participate with? The opposite side of that is that you can act and operate outside of the flow. Outside of the flow, how would I define that? I would say when you don't love an enemy, when you're greedy, stingy, when you are angry, when you don't pursue kindness and love and peace and joy, and faithfulness and forgiveness. When we don't participate with those things, we are out of the flow. And so as we talk about the concept of the true self and the false self, what I'm really talking about is who you are intrinsically and how that never changes. And that is the offering that can actually enter into the flow of everything that is. So when the true self, for me, I define the true self as who you are in God. Who you are in God is you are a child of light. You are a daughter of heaven. If some of you guys, and that's a lot of that vernacular and language comes from the tradition that I come from. If that isn't for you, okay, that's totally okay. I'm really just using words here to say what I believe the true self is. The true self came from that which is endless, which means it is endless. So maybe that's a better way for you to understand the true self. The true self is that part of you that will never end. that part of you that will always keep going, that part of you that has always been in the flow of how things are. Now, the false self, let me just begin by saying the false self is not the bad self. The false self is not your bad self. It's just simply not the true self. The false self, think of this. Think of true self, think of soul. False self, think of your role. True self, think of your soul. False self, think of your role. So maybe that's mom, maybe that's dad, maybe that's doctor, maybe that's teacher, maybe that's whatever. Like if it's on a business card, that's probably you. If it's on a website, that's probably your false self. That's the thing that we're talking about here. The thing that basically occupies your doing out in space and time. There it is. That's what I was looking for. Your false self is the things you do in space and time. But it isn't the true self. It doesn't have the final say. Now, as you begin to learn this true self, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, the most beautiful thing about learning the true self is that once you can discover it within, the only response after that is to like midwife it for everyone you meet. So someone you may meet may not have had this true self realization. The opportunity for you is to midwife that into being. Wake them up. Allow them to see. When you allow your light to shine, what happens is that light enters into that person, into those dark places of that individual, and they start to see who they actually are as well. The most beautiful thing you could ever do is become that which you have always been. So it's this beautiful process of becoming, but it's also this beautiful process of always just being what you've always been. So, hope you're holding hands with me a little bit. I know this is kind of confusing. The true self, let's go. I just want to keep chatting these notes with you guys. The true self is always in that state of becoming, but it's at peace at the current state of being. So like the true self, it doesn't like tap its foot. It doesn't like, come on, let's go. The true self just breathes. It just pauses for a second. It pauses by the orchid. It listens to the bluebird sing. It finds a way to be love. The false self is always snapping its fingers. Where are we going? What's next? What do I got to do? What's next? It's like always trying to catch a breath, right? Always trying to catch a break. The true self, it doesn't have to catch a breath because it's just breath itself. And it doesn't have to catch a break. It's just looking how it can actively participate with beauty. Oh, that's pretty good. The true self is something that just participates with beauty. It is breath itself. The false self is always looking how it can catch a break, always how it can catch a breath. The true self, a lot of different, we can think of different words that maybe people would use with this. The true self, I wrote these down. The inner knower, Christ consciousness, vortex. That's a phrase I've heard recently. The vortex. I call it the song of your soul, the poem that's in your pulse. You, the innocent child. And like maybe even the easiest one, heart, soul. Like that's the true self. Your heart, your soul, that's the true self. The false self, hands. Hands. It's just what you happen to do. It's just what you happen to do. For me, I got a couple real estate companies. Great. I happen to do that. That occupies some of my doing in space and time. But that isn't who I am. That happens to be something that I do. And so the work of religion, the work of spiritual practices, the work of contemplation really is to reconnect with this true self. Religion, the word itself, religion, religio, means to reconnect, to re-ligament. So, yeah, you guys, if you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you've been here a while, I hope my work, if it can do anything but reconnect you to the true self, then I've done my job. Because I think the more we can stay connected to who we are, the better we will do our work with our hands out in the world. The true self gets the opportunity to be the engine behind the false self. But when you think the false self is the engine, when you think I produce, therefore I am my job, I am this, I'm just a mom, I'm just a dad, you fill in the blank. When it's always connected to your roles, you will always be easily offended, easily irked, always upset about something. The true self just breathes. It just enjoys. It just knows that there's nothing to prove. That no matter what my hands do, it doesn't change who I am at the intrinsic and soul level. And that's the offering I want to give you guys today as you interact with these words in the language of true self and false self. If the true self had a name, and matter of fact, I always say this, the true self is who you are and who you were before you had a name. So imagine all of those things that are connected to your name. And then imagine losing those and just hearing, beloved. Beloved. That's the name of you at the true self of the soul level. Daughter of heaven, son of God, child of God, beloved. That's who you are. The false self. The false self is always connected to titles, always connected to titles, always connected to accolades, always connected to prestigious honors, always connected to trophies, always connected to credentials. I mean, just whatever that is. And again, it isn't the bad self. The last thing I want to do is you hear today that your work in the world is not good and beautiful. No. It just doesn't have the final say on you. And let's just go back. Let's rewind for me a handful of years ago. Listen, my mantra was, I produce, therefore I am. What could I build? What could I create? Because if I could build it and I could create it, then I would be something. Then I would have become what I was meant to become. And then, man, when I start crossing paths with guys like the Parker J. Palmers, the Richard Rohrs, the Jim Finleys, the Cynthia Bourgeaus, the Thomas Merton, by the way, is the guy who basically created the whole idea of the true self and the false self. And I probably should have began this whole conversation by saying we owe him a whole lot of gratitude. So, Merton, thank you. Thomas Merton, he's the guy that, basically came up with this vernacular of true self and false self. But again, the false self isn't a bad you. It's just not you. It's just what you happen to do. And the more that we can align you at the soul level, the more we can align you with the flow of how things are, with love, life, joy, peace, patience, kindness, the more we can align you with that flow, with that song of your soul, with that poem of your pulse that is who you are and who you've always been, then you will find your hands doing crazy, beautiful, and wonderful work. So what I wanted to do before we go is just think about drawing a line down the middle of the paper. And what I want to do is break down false self versus true self. And just think about where these words, where these ideas, where these sentences, where these metaphors, where these visions come across your life. I think what you are going to find is you will hear some words and you'll go, oh, I attach to that word when fill in the blank. Or, oh my gosh, when I experience that word, it feels like life all of a sudden gets wings. So I think what you're going to find is that the false self, if it's the only game in town, if it's the only thing that you know, it can wear you down. It can wear you down. But the true self, if you align with the true self, with that song of your soul, that pulse of your poem, that poem of your pulse, if you can align with that, then you start shooting out of bed in the morning and you start getting this smile that is hard to remove. And then you start just giving that away and offering that to everyone that you cross paths with. So let's draw a line in the middle of a page. You doing that with me? Great. Drawing a line in the middle of the page, and let's just think about this, okay? So here we go. So the false self. The false self is always about separation. The true self is always about connection. So just think about things that are happening in your life, things that are happening in the world today. Think about things where people are drawing lines to separate. And then think about places where people are removing those lines and drawing one big circle that just goes around all of us. A line that divides, or a circle that goes around all of us. The false self is the line. Me versus you, us versus them, good guys versus bad guys. The true self knows that there are 7 point some odd billion of us on this planet, all images of the divine. And it draws a circle around those individuals and says, we're in this thing together. Anytime you hear someone speaking of verbiage that revolves around unity, you know that's coming from the true self. Anytime you see someone that's speaking words that are divisive, that draw the line, that separate people, you know that's coming from the false self. The false self is about separation. The true self is about connection. The false self is always about what? What do you do? So, like, is there anything more miserable than the cocktail party? When you're going around and you're meeting someone that you don't know, and hey, and what's the first question? So what do you do? Right? It's the worst. It's the absolute worst. Oh, I'm this. And then it just becomes a jockey and competition on do you do something that's better in their eyes or worse or whatever, whatever. The false self always talks about, what do you do? The true self, think about those people. Think about people that you've met, and quickly they get to, who are you? Who are you? No. I don't want to hear about that. Who are you? What makes you tick? Where do you find beauty? What's keeping you curious? Tell me about the questions you ask. I don't really care about your answers. Tell me about your questions. That who, and that's like what we're all asking, right? We're all asking, who are we? And the true self, man, it's there to remind you, you're a child of the divine. You are a child of the divine. You are a daughter of heaven. That is who you are. That is who you are. The false self, what do you do? Oh, it's the worst. The true self, who are you? Who are you? It's always asking it, and it's mirroring back to you. This is who you are. 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 The false self is always about, oh, I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that. The true self is always, man, we are this, and this is beautiful. Next one's this. Oh yeah, this is probably the most important. The false self is always concerned about the past or the future. The false self is always concerned about the past or the future. The true self is always in the now. So think about that. Anytime you are caught up, you're anxious about, where am I going? What am I going to do? What's next? What's next? What's next? Or the shame and regret and guilt of the past. Oh my gosh, well, because that, now this. And because that happened, I can't do this. And because of that, I can't do that. That's all false self. That's all false self. The true self, it just knows this very breath. It just knows now. It just knows right now. It's inhale and it's exhale. It's the sacrament of the present moment. It's the beauty that's only available right now. Life happens in the now. Life and love and light has your back, and it is ushering in now. The past and tomorrow, the false self's really, really invested in those. Really, really invested in those. The true self, that's just not very entertaining to it. Okay, we made some mistakes. We learned from them. We fell upward, as Rohr says. We fell upward. We learned from that. That taught us something. I learned to do it right by doing it wrong. The true self can speak. Do you hear the spaciousness that the true self can speak from? How wide, how available, how possible. The true self, it doesn't get bogged down in the guilt and the shame and the anxiety. The true self, man, it just goes, dude, I failed, and I failed forward, but I'm here. And there's breath for now, and it's available now. Yeah. I mean, I'm even just breathing, talking these words. Love it. The false self. The false self is always about comparison and critique. The false self is always about comparison and critique. The true self, here it is. The true self is always about compassion and mutuality. Compassion and mutuality. I didn't even say that right. Compassion and mutuality. There we go. Compassion. It's like, although I'm not you, I'm not other than you. It pulls the plank out of its eye and it says, hey, yeah, we're in this thing together. So I'm not going to judge you in that. I'm not going to judge you in that. I could have easily done that. That could easily have been me. The true self, man, compassion, mutuality. Although I'm not you, I'm not other than you. The false self, all comparison, all critique. Well, they do it like that, and we do it like this. You ought to see how they do it. You ought to see what those people eat. You ought to see how they dress. You ought to see how they keep their house. You ought to see what they drive. Yeah, well, you ought to see what they do. You hear the difference? And do you hear how consistent that message is? That's why this awakening, this enlightenment, this lightness, this availability, this possibility. Man, I want people to have this awareness. I want people to wake up to this. I want people to move the route of compassion, not the route of critique and comparison. False self. The false self focuses on differences. The true self focuses on how we are all the same. The false self focuses on doing. The true self focuses on being. Are your conversation all about human doings? Is what you talk about always about what you and others are doing? Or do you have people in your life where you can just talk about who you are and who they are and affirm who they are? The false self graphs things. The false self is like this really, really sexy Excel spreadsheet and like bar chart, pie chart, 3-dimensional. The false self, it knows who's up and who's down, who's right and who's wrong, who's on the left and who's on the right, who's in and who's out. That is the only language the false self knows. The true self is like just an easel waiting to be painted. The true self, it doesn't really care about answers. It just wants to swim in some really beautiful questions and paint something out of those questions. That's it. Yeah, that's it. The true self, it just wants to know, what is love up to? What is beauty trying to teach me right now? What does light have for me today? And some of us, I know that you may hear those words and you're like, I don't know, Ashton, it's kind of new agey. No, I believe that love is the engine of the universe. What is love? Who sang it? Tina Turner? What's love got to do with it? That's the question. That's the question. What is love trying to usher into existence through me right now? And through this individual that I'm meeting right now? And through this stranger right now? And through this friend right now? Are you an Excel spreadsheet? Is your life an Excel spreadsheet, or is your life just this beautiful collection of paint? and questions that you want to paint on an easel. Yeah, there it is. There it is. You want to center back into the true self, center back into beauty. Beauty. Do you want a battle or do you want beauty? Do you want to know who's in or out or do you want beauty? It's that simple. The false self. The false self is very, very constricted. It's a constricted view. It's tight. It's locked up. It's kind of in a corner, if you will. It's almost claustrophobic. The true self, spacious freedom. The true self. Imagine a panoramic view. Imagine a beautiful 360 view that in a way that you could see the entire world. That's the true self. When you can step back and see the greater good rather than the challenge that's happening right there. Or maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. The false self immediately calls out, quote unquote, hell in a handbasket. The true self immediately goes, heaven's at our fingertips. Oh, I'm clapping on that one. The false self immediately goes, where is hell in a handbasket? It's everywhere. Look, can you believe that? Can you believe that tweet? Can you believe this? The true self, heaven's at our fingertips. And we point out heaven at our fingertips at the dinner table. And we point out heaven at our fingertips and we whisper it into our children's ears when we drop them off at first grade. Heaven is at our fingertips. We just say it to ourselves when we're driving 80 miles an hour down the highway in the middle of West Texas and it's not beautiful, but we go, heaven's at our fingertips, right? It's always available. It's not something you have to go to. It is always available in your very breath, and the true self knows that. Watch those conversations and how fast they can go to the riffraff of hell in a handbasket. Move the conversation over, and in your true self, you will say, hey guys, y'all want to hear a beautiful story? I want to tell you something that my child said. I want to tell you something I learned from this homeless man. I want to tell you something that I learned that just happened out of nowhere, but something beautiful happened. Life, love, beauty, joy is happening for us. The true self is always tuned to that reality. The false self, I hadn't even thought about this. The false self's just out of tune. And it's mad because it thinks that its job is going to tune everything up. It played the game, it read the books, it passed the bar, it did the deal, it went to college, it got the job, and then it's like, huh? And the true self just goes, this is kind of awesome. I wonder what's going to happen today. I wonder what's going to happen in this moment. I wonder what that food tastes like. I wonder what that stranger knows that I don't know. I wonder what that person that someone may call the enemy, I wonder what kind of beauty they know to be true. You see the difference? And this is this beautiful connection that's meant to happen for all of us. If we are truly wanting all things to become one, if we are called to become something beautiful together, we must drop the idea and not boast like we do about the false self. Man, this list is kind of long. Next one, the false self. False self always attacks. The false self always attacks. The false self loves war. The false self loves war. The false self can easily be a bully. The true self, it doesn't attack, it observes. And in that observation, it finds a way to adore. Think about that. The false self is always on the attack. The true self is always in a posture of adoration. The false self is always, well, how are we going to do that? Or how are we going to do that? And how are we going to do that? The true self is always, wow. Can you believe this? Wow. Adoration. And these are just words to hold on to. You know, as you go through your day, as you enter a meeting in your office, as you connect with someone, if they start hitting you with those attacking words, if they start talking about difference and comparison and critique, you can back up and just say, hey, whoa. I want to speak from the heart here. I want to talk about unity. I want to talk about being. I want to talk about compassion. Once you start learning to speak from the true self, the people that are in the state of the false self, they will start to drop some of those weapons where they want to always be on the attack. And then something beautiful can happen. So, to repeat, the false self is about attack. The true self is about adoration. Oh, and here's this one. The false self is always about more and more. More and more. If you're not growing, you're dying. More and more. You got to do more. You got to be more. You got to go more places. You got to do more things. You got to build, build, build. Make it bigger and bigger, bigger. Scale, scale, scale. The true self, oh man, it's just about more and more of less and less. I even lose my breath talking about the false self. And then I get it back in the true self doing this podcast. It's crazy. The false self, the false self is about more and more. The true self is about less and less. The true self knows that wherever you're at, you're going to have a handful of friends that you're going to do life with. You can move to New York City if you want to. That's great. But you're not going to be friends with 8 million people. You're going to have 2 to 3, 4, maybe 5 people that really, really know you, that you get to enjoy, that you get to be with. It's not about scale. It's just about being in the moment. It's not about how can we take this and make it that. It's just about how can we be with this? How can we be with this moment? How can I not miss this moment? How can I lose the phone? How can I lose the ego? How can I lose the agenda? How can I lose the noise? And how can I participate with the music? I can't believe I haven't even called the false self the ego. The ego typically is the false self. The ego typically is the false self. True self, like we said, is the heart and soul. And it's about less and less. It blocks out the white noise so it can be and enjoy and dance and participate with the music that is happening in the moment. In the moment. It stands back and it can adore. Oh yeah. The false self is always a victim. The false self is always a victim. The true self is always in a posture, or it gets to a posture to where it can find ways to forgive. The false self, man, slightest thing can set it off. The true self, oh, they don't know. Like the false self is always, can you believe? And the true self is always, man, no one's ever taught them a better way. Can you believe that person said that or did that or made that post? The true self is always, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Someone said that before, right? Yes. Yeah, only the true self in the midst of sacrifice and crucifixion can say, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. The false self is easily offendable. The true self is unoffendable. It can't be offended. It just is. It doesn't even know the game of becoming a victim. It's a rock. It's steady. It's constant. It's always being held by the immovable one. It's always being held by the one that is unshakable. I mean, you take that to the bank. The true self is always being held by the immovable one. The false self loves facts and answers. The true self loves questions. I don't know. What do you think? The true self, the false self is always, what does it mean when, and what are your thoughts on? And okay, so if that's your thoughts on that, then what are your thoughts on this? That's just not very interesting to the true self. The true self is more about connection and compassion. I don't know. How can we together do something beautiful? Yeah, but what if those guys and these, I don't know. That's not an interesting question to me. The true self is always about something that's like a kaleidoscope. It's a bunch of things. The true self goes, you know what? To make a symphony, you have to have about 50 instruments that are played by different people that all look a lot different. And some of them you blow in, and some of them you hit, and some of them you strum, and some of them you bang, and some of them you slap, and some of them you do this. But there's this, in the diversity, there's beauty. And something comes together. And the wanting, the O-N-E-I-N-G, the wanting of that thing becomes this beautiful song. The false self would rather just have everything dismantled and say, well, it's not us, and we're not them, and we're not like that, and we're different. The true self goes, that's a bad question. Next. The true self goes, I don't know. I'm more interested in what's the music. I'm not really concerned about the noise in the background. I'm more concerned about how can we make music with what we have. The false self. Oh, the false self is earned. The false self is always earned. The true self is just straight up gift. It's gift, which is why you can give it away. When you earn something, right, your dollars, it's hard to give those dollars away. That's hard to do. Why? Because you earned them. Your time, your investment, your energy. The true self, I mean, it's just a gift. And when you can learn to know and honor that gift within you, guess what you do? You midwife it for others. You remind others. You help people remember. You help people reconnect. You remind people of who they are. Hey, guess what? The truest thing I know about you is you are a son of heaven. And I don't think that's how you would really, really want to act. So let's walk down this road a little bit and talk about it. And guess what? When we leave this conversation, I'm going to remind you again of who you are. You see the difference? You see the reconciliation? You see how healthy that is? Rather than, can you believe? Okay, first off, let's talk about A. A, you did this, and B, you did that. With our kids, my wife and I, we will always begin the conversation. Hey, let's just start this out right here. Just know we don't keep score. We don't keep score. And in this family, we are a gift to each other. And sometimes we forget that we're that gift. And that happens because guess what? You're human. But we're going to remind you, and we're going to keep telling you who you are. Because the more I can tell you that, the more I can call that out in you, the more I can remind that into your soul and into your bones, chances are you're going to take heaven with you to a lot of places. And you're not going to be so concerned about the hell that's happening in hand baskets all around the world. You're going to be part of the one that ushers in the music of heaven. Bam! Let's go. I love that. The false self is always them and those people and them over there and they. It's really into that. The true self, it's about us. It's about we. It's let us do it. Let's come together. What can we do? Let's not divide the thing. Let's draw a big circle and let's all be in that circle. And lastly, the false self, if you want to know one word, the false self is no. It defines itself by what it's not. The true self ushers every moment, makes every choice, enters every relationship, conducts business as much as it can remember to, by who it is, by saying yes to that. The false self is no, I'm not that. The true self is, yes, this is who I am. This is who I am. And if it's true in me, then it's got to be true in you. And so it goes and it gives people yeses, because the world is so freaking good at giving people what they're not. Well, you're not that. You're not smart enough, or you're not gifted and talented, and you're not this, and you don't come from that area, and you didn't study that, and you don't think this way, and you don't follow our doctrine, and you don't do that, and you don't do business like this. The true self, it's like, let me tell you who you are. This is 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 who you are. I can tell you, I've got some people in my life, parents, my wife, in-laws, some people across the country, a gentleman in North Carolina, a friend in New York City, a lady that's a dear friend in Arizona. I've got people that they have given me yeses in life. They have spoken things into me. I have kept the email. I have written what they told me in a journal. And those yeses have been incredible tailwind for me. We may not see the world the same, but these people have all said, this is who you are. This is who you are. And they enter that flow. They enter that flow that life is happening for us, that love is happening for us, that beauty is happening for us. And when you can enter that flow as well, you can move gently down the stream. The false self rows the boat upstream. No pain, no gain. That's what the false self says. No pain, no gain. The true self, it just can't believe that the river's already running. And it gently walks in, puts its boat in, and as gentle and as loving as it can, fly fishes in the waters. And it catches beautiful things of wisdom. And it reels in amazing, beautiful things of beauty. And wonder and awe and mystery surrounds the river that it's flowing down. And every chance you get as you flow down that river, you give people those yeses. And that is who you are in the true self. The true self loves to mirror to people who and what they are. Yeah, man. True or false? True or false? Ask yourself that as you move into conversations the next few weeks, whether it's in business or at home. And this is one thing to do. When you speak from this place, this is kind of funny. Put your hand over your heart. And when you speak from that place, it's even okay to tell someone, "Hey, I'm about to speak to you from the truest place that I know. A place that's full of love and beauty and joy and peace and harmony and hope and life and liberation and reconciliation. I'm speaking to you from that place. I'm speaking to you from the truest place of me that I know." You will not put your hand on your heart when you speak from the false self. You'll be throwing hands around. You'll be throwing your fist up in the air, hitting stuff, hitting walls. Put your hand over your heart. Hey, I want to speak to you from a standpoint of who I am and who you are. I want to speak to you from a standpoint of connection. I want to speak to you in the now. I want to speak to you from a place of compassion. I want to speak to you from a position of we are not different, we are the same. I want to speak to you from a position of being, not doing. I want to speak to you from a spacious place. I want to speak to you out of adoration. I want to speak to you out of this spot of seeing what is truly important, of knowing that less and less is greater than being more and more. I want to speak to you from a place of forgiveness. I want to speak to you from a place that's not offendable. I want to speak to you from a place that's kind of mysterious. I want to speak to you from a place that's just a gift. I want to speak for you from a place that's just one big lovely yes. And if we can become those people, man, that's how this joint's going to tune up. So I honor that in you. Wherever you're at, wherever you are, I honor that in you. And as you approach this week, as you enter the river of love, as you pull out that fly rod, I'm talking in metaphors, by the way. As you enter that river of love and you pull out that fly rod and you start reeling in beautiful wisdom, crazy beauty, massive amounts of wonder and awe, and all these gifts, I ask that you give it away. Give it away. Give it away. And as you move in this true self, and you empower the false self from the true self, you allow your doing to be powered and engaged from your being. I ask that you don't forget to pause by the orchid, listen to the bluebirds sing, and be